Well, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Brand Builder Show. We're in for a treat today. We've got Tim and Scott, and they are launching a brand new business. There's so many facets in this: product development, product creation, marketing, and it's going to be a fascinating episode. Tim, Scott, welcome to the show today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ben.
Great to be here. Thanks, Ben.
It is really fascinating to me, partly because I have seen like the pickleball craze over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. I've been following it because I love racket sports. I love any kind of sport, but seeing how pickleball is absolutely blowing up in the US is really interesting. And you guys have a product that is kind of related to pickleball, right? Talk us about what this product is, what this new business is, and then maybe we'll get into some of the backstory of your journey and then swing back around to this new business. But just to kind of give everybody a bit of a, whet their appetite for the episode, what is this new business you're launching?
Tim, you go first. we usually are so good at this, but Tim was waiting for me. I'm all right. I'll go. I would go. I would love to talk about it. So PaddleSmash it's like the love child of pickleball and spikeball. So You just said pickleball is booming. Why isn't it taken off in the UK, or is it? It's just not at the same speed?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we hit record. There are places you can play it. There's somewhere 10 minutes from me. I looked it up. You can play, but it's like, a repurposed tennis court indoors. I think part of it is the weather here sucks. Everywhere I seem to see on Instagram, everyone playing pickleball is like Laguna Beach or somewhere like really cool and sunny. And, whereas here it just rains all the time. So I don't know, maybe that's it, but it's starting to, but there's other sports like paddle. I started playing paddle, which is really picking up steam as well. So, I got high hopes for pickleball in the UK.
Yeah, I would bet on it to get big there too. The one downside is that it doesn't play well in the wind, and I think you tend to have some windy environments there, so it's tougher. It's huge here. We knew it was huge here. I love playing pickleball. I played it for 2 hours this morning, and so. I think Tim and I were on the lookout for what was the next project for us. And I'm like, I'm spending all this time playing pickleball. I'm like, man, there's something here. There's something happening here in pickleball. We also, we'll get to our backgrounds, but have seen the success of a game called Spikeball, which for those that don't know, it's kind of a round net. You're playing 2 versus 2. And it's kind of like a volleyball meets sort of this round net, and you're bump set spiking the ball. And man, that's been the best success story in outdoor games in the last 10 years. And so for us, we're always looking for these trends. It's like both of our backgrounds has been a little trend hunting and trying to answer trends. And so we saw both of those trends and we're like, man, maybe there's something where you kind of take elements of both of those games. We actually sketched it out on a napkin, kind of had an idea, kind of the very early stages of an idea ready to explore when I was introduced to an inventor who had created essentially what we were thinking about. And it's always a good sign when that happens. You're like, all right, there's something in the ether. Like, kind of we're all thinking about it and circling around it. Now we have to just be the first to get it to market, or one of the first. So, but the essence of our idea is those two ideas combined. You are using paddles, you're using a pickleball, and you're trying to bump, set, and smash a ball back into this hard plastic court. Once you do that successfully, the other team has to do the same. Bump, set, smash back in, and it's kind of back and forth play passing back and forth. But you're playing around a hexagon-shaped base with a net system coming up. So you're kind of circling around that. You're not set in a position, and it's just like it's buckets of fun. It is one of the best, most fun things I've ever made, honestly. So that's a little bit of a quick teaser for what the game is.
Yeah, it is definitely. There's so much I want to get into here. So, but I do want to hear about your background and what's led you to this point before we pick apart some of the details. Because you mentioned about inventing, coming up with ideas. You guys have a pretty entrepreneurial past, from what I gather.
We do, yeah. So I can share mine to start. So I was actually originally a software entrepreneur, and had read an article in Inc. magazine that talked about the creation of a game. That was a party game that became really popular here in the States called Cards Against Humanity. I think it actually got pretty big in the UK as well. And so this article kind of laid out the blueprint for how those guys had kind of taken their game to market. They were just like some high school buddies that had done that. And so as like a fun kind of passion project on the nights and weekends, there was a game that I'd been playing with family and friends at like lake houses for a couple of years late at night when you're just bored and looking for something to do, that I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think I could take the game that I've been playing and turn it into something a little more official based on the roadmap that was laid out in the article. And so I went ahead and launched that and ended up getting, I did a little Kickstarter campaign and got funded, didn't, blow up like you see some of these go crazy on Kickstarter, but it was the first win and kind of got the ball rolling. And through that, I actually was introduced to Scott, who at the time he had started a company called Marbles the Brain Store. There are like a retail locations that carried toys and games, focused mostly on brain health. Still questioning what my game did to help brain health, Scott, but either way, he liked the concept and decided to carry the game. So that's how we met. And I can get, Scott can tell a little bit more about his background, but so that took me into the toy and game space, and that's where I'm planning on focusing the rest of my career.
Nice. And what happened with that game? Did it continue successfully?
Yeah, so the software company, just going back a little bit further, so the software company was acquired by LinkedIn. Oh, nice. And then the game itself, I came out with a few different versions of it, and it was ultimately picked up by, so what happened was the game did kind of take off, and it was ended up being carried in like Target and Walmart and Barnes and Noble, some of these like really big retailers here in the US. And that just kind of got the attention of some of the bigger players in the space. And so there was one in particular that was pretty hot for it. It was a private equity backed toy and game company here in the United States, and ended up acquiring the company. And so I sold that off as well. Yeah, nice. And so
what was the game called?
It's called Utter Nonsense. Okay. And the concept behind it was very simple. You had two sets of cards. You'd have accent cards and phrase cards. Phrases were just kind of like silly sayings, basically. Yeah. And then the accents would be just like you're imagining. British would be one example of an accent. There'd be like a redneck accent. It was an adult game, so some of them were a little more aggressive. But you basically would have like the card for that round could be like a pirate accent. And so everyone had to go around and pick one of the phrases in their hand to say in a pirate accent. So you'd be like, "Arr, matey," like whatever the thing said. And there's one person who's the judge that just subjectively decides on who they like the best. So again, just a silly game, but it struck a chord here and ended up doing pretty well.
People, I often think about a game, it being, once you've got the idea, it's quite easy to produce. Is that the biggest challenge, the idea, or is there some other challenges beyond that?
I would take the other side of that argument. I think execution is the really complicated part. The idea is easy. It's not easy to have good ideas, but as someone who I think comes up with a lot of ideas, I just think the execution really is the more complicated part. I mean, in that particular instance, it was a little bit easier because it was literally just a deck of cards. So there wasn't a whole lot to it as far as that goes, but there's still, I don't know, the manufacturing of it, the marketing of it, the distribution point, there's still a lot of moving pieces there. So cool. I may take the other side.
No, that's good. That's good to know. And then just in terms of the exit, like, we talking life changing here, or just a step in the journey? What are we talking?
Yeah, I'd say more so. I mean, between the two, it kind of let me choose my own path. I'll put it that way. Like not enough to like where I'm done working, but just where like I don't have to work for somebody else. So
good. Awesome. And how about you, Scott? How did you come into this journey?
Yeah, that different route than Tim, but I ended up getting kind of hired into a business incubator in Chicago. They were hiring young, scrappy entrepreneurs. None of us had an idea at that point. It was like, hey, come in here. We'll give you guys an environment where you hopefully can come up with good ideas, and we'll potentially invest in it. And so we were there kind of always coming up with concepts, throwing them up on the wall. Everyone would would pick it apart and decide what was worthy of going forward. We'd even write our ideas on a goldfish cutout. The idea being that you had to treat your ideas like a pet that you weren't afraid to kind of flush down the toilet if it had passed on. It's treat your ideas the same way. Don't fall so in love with them that you're not afraid to flush it down the toilet. Right. And we came up with this concept around brain health. It was all this neat emerging science around brain health. And then there was this fear among baby boomers of cognitive decline. And we're like, all right, well, maybe there's an answer to this fear, but no one was aggregating it together in one spot. So we opened a location in downtown Chicago called Marbles the Brain Store. And the premise was, we're going to give you a bunch of amazing products that are good for your brain. And some of it was toys and games, because we had been told by a bunch of neuroscientists and occupational therapists that they were using games in their practices to help people. It was a thing that their patients would be willing to do over and over. And so as it evolved, we started with one location in downtown Chicago. Over 10 years, we grew to have over 40 locations across the U.S., but it definitely evolved into more of a toy and game focused concept, because that's what people were buying in our stores. They weren't buying the $500 software. They weren't buying the supplements, the pedometers. They were buying toys and games. And so we became a toy and game store, and we're known in the industry for kind of a rising star in that space. We were a bit of a Kickstarter, where we were on the lookout for up and coming brands and companies. Usually companies just like Tim, where it was their first game and their only game, and they hadn't been anywhere yet. Yeah. And we were the spot that we wanted to be a place where people launched their ideas. Yes. And brain health was still at the core, but it was maybe a little less important. Tim's, I would argue that Tim's was brainy in a way, but it wasn't scientific brainy. So that was the idea. We grew, we launched a bunch of fun brands. Ultimately, we sold, the whole concept was sold off to a big Canadian company, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company in Canada called Spin Master. They're the fourth biggest toy and game company in the world. I've heard of them, yeah. So they kind of swallowed Marbles up, spit a bunch of it out, and it still exists in its own form, but not the way it was with me. I worked there for 3 years, and then kind of got the itch again to kind of be off on my own, or be much smaller. And so that's where Tim and I met back up. We kind of vowed to work together again at some point. We hit it off when we were working together with my shops, and thought, all right, we're going to find something to do together. It's just a matter of time. And so we started looking aggressively, call it 2 years ago. And this is kind of what led us together.
Yeah, nice. Good. And yeah, let's pick up that journey then. PaddleSmash. Got that right, haven't I? PaddleSmash.com.
Yes, PaddleSmash. PaddleSmash.com.
Get a few plugs in there. So 2 years ago, you kind of started really on this journey. Talk to us about, the evolving concept, when you decided on this particular one. Why did you decide, and how did you go through that ideation process, of, product research, etc.?
So this one was somewhat unique. Scott and I, for the most part, will actually come up with concepts ourselves. And a little backstory, and Scott may have already mentioned this, but we had been kind of circling around doing something with pickleball, and had sketched up something that looks very similar to what is PaddleSmash now. And we that's all we had, though, was just this idea on paper. And a few weeks after that, Scott was actually introduced to a gentleman by the name of Joe Bingham, who is he's a structural engineer that lives in Utah, not too far from where Scott lives. And he and his 7 kids love playing pickleball. And the problem was, pickleball courts, like everywhere today in America, is that they're always crowded. Even though there are a lot of them, they're still not everywhere. So he was traveling 20 minutes away to have to play pickleball with his family. And just being that structural engineer, kind of brainy guy who likes to tinker, he was like, I'm going to try to figure out something we could play in our backyard. And his kids used to love playing spike ball. So he kind of had that as an inspiration. He's like, but, more wanting to do something on the pickleball side of things. And so Joe actually created, he's the inventor of PaddleSmash. And he created a prototype that was pretty slick. It was glued together a big piece of plastic, and he just kind of Frankenstein this thing together, but ultimately made a really nice prototype that he played with his friends and family and neighbors for a while, and wanted to commercialize it, wanted to bring it to market, didn't really kind of know how to do that. And that's when he was introduced to Scott. And so it was just kind of a very fortuitous moment where we had just been talking about, wanting to do something very similar. And then here was, this gentleman who had already figured out all of the details. Yeah. So it would take us a long time to kind of determine the dimensions. And I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff that he figured out on his own through trial and error and gameplay. And so we said, okay, great. We'll do a licensing deal with Joe. And so that's the arrangement that we have with him, is that we license the idea from Joe. He gets a royalty based on sales. And then Scott and I take on all the risk, and we are the publishers of the game. Okay. So that's a little bit of the backstory. Yeah. And so then from there, we had to, while Joe did have the kind of complete game figured out, it just wasn't ready to take it to market. It was something, I think it was like 60 pounds. It couldn't be set up on shelves or anything like that. So we really had to like start from scratch in terms of like designing it for retailers, designing it to be shipped, and making it available for mass market. So we hired a design and engineering firm, like an industrial design firm, that could then take Joe's concept and turn it into something that, would be able to mass produce, sit on shelves, et cetera. Yeah. So that was about a year-long process. And then just basically a few weeks ago, about a month ago, we are actually now live in the market.
On sale?
On sale.
Nice.
That's correct.
Do you ship to the UK? Yep. I might have to pick one up.
We do not yet.
I know, we can figure out how to get one to you, but we're not shipping to consumers yet. We will at some point. Yeah. But we had to pick our market first and pick this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Are you just doing wholesale in the US, or so you're not doing direct to consumer?
No, actually, we actually went into this planning to do direct to consumer to launch. Both Tim and I obviously have a lot of experience with wholesale, and know the benefits and costs of doing wholesale. I'd say obviously the benefit is you get mass exposure. The cost is that they don't have a lot of patience for your product, number one. And number two, it's just really hard to get into these mass market retailers. Tim got his game in. I'd say that was an exception to the rule. It's usually a lot of begging, a lot of waiting. And so we wanted to kind of, the direct to consumer opportunity has really made it so it's easier to get in front of consumers. You're not as reliant on mass market retail. And so we knew that and decided direct to consumer was our route. So we launched our own Shopify site and our own Amazon store about a month ago, and are having some nice success on both of those channels out of the gate. But we also recognize the value of wholesale and of brick and mortar retail. And so their buying cycles require us to get in front of them now. They're picking product for next summer, next fall. And so we started to do just a little bit of cold outreach. Just as we didn't have any relationships really in this space. I've spent my time in toys and games, and we were really thinking our product is more for sporting goods stores. And so we were kind of doing this blind outreach. We were tracking down buyers on LinkedIn and kind of calling in favors to friends that we knew had product in sporting goods stores, and then sending emails completely cold. And I'd say we in many ways have lucked out. Luck is a funny word because so much of luck is, you can spread out your surface area of luck by sending a lot of emails out. And part of our luck, part of what makes it work for us is that we're riding the coattails of two very successful products. Pickleball. Yeah. Every buyer in the U.S. right now buying in sporting goods is full aware of pickleball. I'm sure their bosses are saying, find anything out there that's pickleball related because it's booming. And then they've all ridden the wave of spike ball over the last 10 years in the US. It's been a massive success for these sporting goods stores. So for us to send an email that says we've created a product that merges pickleball and spike ball, they were like, yeah, take my money a little bit. I mean, it took some work on our end, and it's not a done deal, but we are in Dick's Sporting Goods, the biggest sporting goods retailer in the U.S. This fall we'll be in for tests. So it was kind of a fun thing. We sent the email out. We got an immediate response back, and they were like, come to Pittsburgh and present to us in person. And we're like, all right, let's do it. This wasn't the plan, but let's do it. So we flew out there and presented, thinking if they took it, they would take it for next spring or summer. But they almost immediately reached back out and said, listen, we want to expedite this thing. We think it's got real legs. We're putting it in select stores this fall. So they've picked out their top 20 stores in warm weather states, and they're putting it into those stores for this fall. And then the hope is that we'll roll it out to more stores in the spring. So direct consumer was our plan, with mass market to follow. It's kind of happened now that we're doing both at the same time in many ways.
Yeah. Well, that's a good sign, right? It's really picking up steam really quickly. It's an amazing sign. So that's super, super exciting. We're just stepping back a bit, because there's so many. I feel like we could do a podcast episode on each of these areas, but just to talk through product development, and then I'd love to get into the marketing side as well, what you're doing on the marketing front. But for a product development perspective, because a lot of our listeners will maybe create and sell products that are very much known to people and make small adjustments. You're creating something completely from scratch. Like, firstly, where are you getting this made? Is it US? Is it China? What's happening there?
So it is being manufactured in China. We have tried and looked, and actually recently, to making it in the US, and it's not. So the base, which we call the quart, is fairly large, and it's an injection molded plastic. And due to the size and nature of it, it's not something that a lot of manufacturers can do. Actually, our Chinese manufacturer also had a hard time finding somebody to source to do that. And so we are working with a Chinese firm to manufacture and produce the product.
And has it been a big investment in product development? I imagine there's lots of design, lots of tooling, as much as obviously you're able or willing to disclose. Like, what's that journey been like?
Yes. So this one was a bit more significant as far as upfront costs go. And, like when I did the card game, it was literally just a box of cards. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it. So it was a fairly low risk thing for me to pursue on my own. And I think that was probably one of the hurdles that Joe would have had if he tried to do this once he got into it, just realizing that from the upfront perspective, it was going to be quite pricey. So for one would just be, obviously there's the design and engineering that we had to do. That's something that we outsourced to like a really high level firm. They're not cheap, but they do great work. And so, they came up with the design that we ultimately went with. And then the manufacturer, there was a series of prototypes where we're, 3D printing. That's the beauty of doing what we do right now, is that 3D printing really gives you the ability to kind of like take what you have on paper and make it a reality fairly quickly and fairly low cost. But then, once we finalized everything and approved the 3D printed version of what we wanted to make, the cost for tooling is substantial, especially for something of this size. And so I think roughly 50 grand, something like that for upfront costs. And so, Scott and I, when we started just kind of noodling this idea ourselves, we would mention it to some of the folks in our network who we just respected their opinion. And the good thing there was, unintentionally, we were fundraising. We didn't realize it at the time, because after we would show this to whoever we were showing it to, we almost immediately got the follow-up question of, can I invest? So we decided, this thing is going to be probably a little bit more pricey than we want to take on to bring it to market. It seems like it's a pretty hot item. Let's raise some capital. So we did actually do a small fundraising round of about $500 US, and and then got off to creating our first, did our first production run, which just got here.
Yeah, and those were going to be my next questions, I suppose, is what was it that made you confident enough, because that's a big sum of money to invest, whether that's through raising finance or yourselves. What were the kind of things, the signals that you were looking for? Was it just excitement in the people you were talking to? Was there any data-driven research you did? Was it a feeling? What do you go on as entrepreneurs that says, yeah, we're going to raise $500,000 and go for this? What was it?
It's a lot of all of those. I think the way it happened was I met Joe. I find myself in a spot where I'm constantly being pitched ideas. And when I was running those retail stores, I was kind of in the seat of always evaluating concepts for our shops, meeting with inventors as well, and developed a decent radar for kind of good, bad product and what had opportunity, kind of what had legs. And so when I met Joe, I think my guard was up. I'm like constantly being pitched ideas, but like almost immediately I was like, okay, there's something interesting here. Joe, I need to see it in person. So I drove up to his house. I mean, he happens to live close to me. Drove up, played it in his backyard. And like, again, like my guard's always up. Like I like immediately was feeling it. I'm like, easy to get into, easy to figure out how to play, fun to play across a broad range of ages. It just checked a bunch of boxes. So then I called Tim and I'm like, Tim, listen, we might have something. I described it to Tim and Tim's like, that sounds great, but I want to see it. So Tim flew from Chicago to Utah to evaluate it with me. We set it up in my backyard and played it together, kind of one-on-one, just to like initially figure out the game and figure out if we liked it and Tim liked it. When it passed kind of that hurdle, we were like, all right, let's now take it out to the public and like get some true feedback. And so we took it down to the local pickleball courts. I've got some 5 minutes from my house. They're always crowded. And so we just knew we'd get a group of people that like had no previous experience with it. And I think one of the big red flags I have from inventors is when they tell me that their friends and family loved it, and that's the justification for me loving it. And I'm always like, well, yeah, I mean, naturally, like your friends and family love it. Have you played it with anyone outside of that group? And when they hadn't, I was really concerned. And so, I felt the same way. I was like, we've got to get this outside of our realm and see. So we took it down there, set it up, and just like immediately we're getting really interesting reactions. People were stopping mid-game, coming over to the fence to ask about it. They were coming out and asking if they could play. And we weren't presenting this game as if it was ours. It wasn't. We said to them, listen, we don't know if this is any good. An inventor lent this to us to try out. We're trying to decide if we like it. And I think that put everyone else's guard down. They were like, all right, well, I'm not hurting your feelings if I tell you the truth here. That's actually something I would recommend to anyone trying to evaluate an idea, is to present it as if it's not your own, even if it is yours. Always say, somebody sent me this thing, help me figure out if this is any good. So that's what we did. And we were getting genuine feedbacks, most of it positive, some of it constructive. It was like, listen, this thing is huge and heavy. I couldn't fit this into my car. I wouldn't buy this if I couldn't fit it into my car. Well, noted. Like we knew right out of the gate, like this thing needed to be compact enough that it could easily be folded into it and put into a car and easy to carry around. So like great feedback, but on the whole, very, very positive. Like we had one guy grinning the entire time he was playing, finished, asked if he could invest, and then asked if he could buy that sample, then left. And we're like, where did he go? He comes back 15 minutes later with his teenage son, and he's like, I had to show it to Dylan. And so then Dylan plays it with us, and we're like watching dad and teenage son play together. And you could just tell this is something that dad has been searching for. He's like, all right, a game I can play with him, that he's having fun, I'm having fun, and I can hold my own. And to us, like even just that little focus group told us who we think is our core audience. Our core audience is family, and it's parents looking to play with their teenage kids. And, this is like goes back to the origin story of this game where Joe couldn't keep up with his teenage sons playing spike ball. Well, our game is much easier to play. So that was like just in that little focus group, we gained a ton of insights that led us to say, we think there's something here. This is worth us making a bet on. But even then, you are taking big risks. Most products fail. And so, I think jury's still out on whether we'll succeed, but we feel very optimistic based off of kind of the experience we've had over the last year and this early month worth of read.
Yeah, you've got me excited, that's for sure. Um, so that,
There was one other thing too, just
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
add to that in terms of like more data-driven
Mm,
research. We looked into, because we had never done a backyard game before. We had plenty of experience with called typical toys and
mm,
games. But we looked into like what does the market for toys and games, sorry, outdoor games look like, and it's quite large. It's one of the largest that we just kind of didn't realize that, but it's also the fastest growing. And I think maybe it has something to do with COVID and just everyone desperate to be
mm.
outside. And so that was another just kind of checkpoint for us to be like, okay, like this is a big market that we're going to go after, and it's a big market that's growing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've got the idea locked in. Then when it comes to the funding, you mentioned about people wanting to invest, a round of funding. For a complete beginner that's launching something innovative like this, how do you even go about this? A friend offers you 50 grand to invest. You just take his cash and just promise him some money in the future. Like, how does it how does it actually work?
So it's always interesting doing the initial
Mm,
fundraise because there are no metrics to go off of, right? It's different when you've been in business for a number of years, you have sales data. There's more of a system in
yeah.
place for once you're a mature company. However, the early stage stuff, the pre-launch stuff, it's more of an art than a science. And so really it's about what can you convince somebody to pay for something that doesn't quite exist. And we recognized that there was a very strong interest in this game, and we think reasonable but fair but aggressive
Mhm.
terms. And we did kind of a big pitch call with everyone saying, hey, we're going to raise, I'll just, can I share, Scott, or is
Sure.
that not something we want public?
No, sure.
Yeah, so we raised $500,000 on a $4 million
Okay.
valuation. And so, like, how is it worth $4 million when we haven't, we didn't have anything at that time? I think part of it is just like so there's some things that we had going for
Mhm.
ourselves. We have a history and track record of success in this particular space. Um, Obviously, everyone sees in what's happening with the pickleball blowing up and wanted some exposure to that. So there was a lot for the same reasons that the buyers at retailers are excited about
Mm.
this game. I think there was the same feeling and sentiment from potential investors. So we established a valuation, said this is what we're raising and how much we're raising, and are you interested? And we shared it to just a few of those initial people that we talked to that had said they wanted to talk, they were interested. So we went back to them, said, here it is. Let us know if you're in. And literally everyone said yes. So that was
Yeah.
it. I can't say that they all go that easy, but in this particular instance,
Yeah.
it did go pretty well.
Again, it's a sign of a good idea, isn't it? That everybody's in, everybody's excited. Because people that have that kind of money to invest, they have gotten it by being smart and having, making good decisions, and so that's a really good sign. And so then you've given
Yeah,
up equity in the company to enable that. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. So we've given up a portion of the
Hmm.
equity, relatively small. So 500,000 at a $4 million valuation. I think something like
Mm.
12%. So Scott and I still own roughly 44%
Hmm.
of it, which was fine. For us to each give up 5 or 6%
Yeah.
to not be out 250 grand each,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. If that's what it's going to take to get it off the ground, we felt like that was a fair trade.
Yeah. And have you started to model your projections in terms of sales and, if you're going to have to take on further funding in the future, in the next couple of years, what do you think it looks like?
We hope not. I think the goal here is that sales will provide, cash flow of the
Hmm.
business will provide enough to, you know, do what we
Yeah.
need to grow this company. Now, if for some reason we need to be in the UK tomorrow, we need to be in Australia tomorrow, those things happen. If your listeners, just there's huge demand
Yeah.
from Ben Donovan's listeners, where we need to go do however many production
Mm.
runs and come up with that kind of capital. Like there is a scenario there, I guess. But if we play it right and we manage our cash properly, I will share that like Scott and I don't take salaries, so we are essentially working for
Yeah.
free right now, just to kind of like stay as lean as
Mm-hmm.
possible. So because of that, we've just maintained, just being as lean as
Mm-hmm.
possible right now while we're just trying to get this off the
Yeah.
ground.
And your mindset going into it, is it that this is a passion project you want to run forever, or you're building it for a few years to then sell? Do you go in with either of those mindsets, or is it just see what happens?
It's a good
Yeah,
question.
I think that it's, yeah. Do you want to take this one, Scott?
You got it, Tim. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so we are of the opinion that we'll say for one, we set this up almost in the sense of like bootstrapping. So like, yes, we did raise capital, but we gave up very little. We think we are doing it in a way that we don't have to continue raising capital. So that's what, coming from a software background, I mean, once you take capital, typically it's like a drug and you need more of it because you just have to grow. And so while we've taken initial capital, we hope that that's not going to have to continue to be the case, that we need to further raise capital to grow. And so with that, there's a scenario here where we can continue to operate this business, cash flow profitably, issue dividends to investors, and just be on our merry way. The reality is, I'd say, with Scott and I's history is that, we love to start things and get them going. Part of why we do what we do is that we don't love big bureaucratic companies and organizations and managing a ton of people. And, that kind of takes the fun out of it for us. So I would say while the business could be set up to run for a long time, the reality is that Scott and I, just with our own wishes, we would likely look to sell it, once we establish some level of success.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, you want the freedom to be out playing pickleball 2 hours in the morning, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. Last topic then, real briefly, because your time is precious. But from a marketing standpoint, wholesale would be like a whole other conversation in itself. But just in terms of your direct to consumer, getting it out there. Obviously, appearing on podcasts is one angle. But what's the kind of the collective, project looking like for marketing this on a D2C level?
Yeah, we've been lucky to have a couple of pioneers pave the way a little bit in front of us. So I'd say Spikeball, who I keep bringing up, big success story. They've shown a lot of people how this can be done. Another one that's been a big success in the U.S. over the last 3 years is called CrossNet. And we've got connections with them. They've been very open and willing to share what's worked for them. So we're trying to follow in many ways the pattern they've laid out. One of the biggest things is that games inherently have this, call it like a viral coefficient. So, if you play a game, you own it, and you're playing with 3 of your buddies, and they have a good experience, well, more than likely, those buddies will want to buy it as well. And that's just kind of how gameplay, kind of general board game world works, is that if you have something that is good and fun to play, well, generally it can start to spread organically. The nice thing about an outdoor game is you're going in and doing it out in public, generally. And so you get passersby seeing you play, come up and ask you about it. That's really what happened with Spikeball. It's what happened with CrossNet, is they kind of got enough out into the market. It was like, call it a critical mass, that they reached a tipping point with their games, where just enough got out there that enough people were kind of evangelizing for them that it started to spread. Without them spending buckets of money. So we've got an ad agency helping us. We are putting ads out in social media, but we are also working the more organic side. It's not free. We have to send free samples out to a bunch of people, but we're trying to kind of pinpoint the right people to get it out in the hands of. Like, one fun example here is I went to like a local festival in my community, and at this point we didn't even have sellable goods. This was pre-launch. I just had my sample, but I was like, I'm just going to get it out there and play and let people see it. If people ask me about it, I'll have a business card with our website on it. And so through that, like, we sold a handful. But one guy got super excited about it, And he has, I think we can trace 15 sales to this one guy just because he's played it with a bunch of different friends. Like they have this video of them playing on a houseboat, and like that just has organically spread. And our hope is that that is emblematic of what we can do kind of nationwide and ultimately worldwide, is you get it into the right hands of people that are connectors, and they then start to spread the word. So we're trying to do that both by sending out free samples and by incentivizing people to talk about it. So we do have an affiliate program set up where you can immediately upon purchase of our product be signed up, given your own unique code. And if someone asks you about it, you can offer them $20 off. And if they transact, you get $20 commission back.
Nice.
And so we're just trying to turn our consumers into our evangelizers, the ones that kind of go out and spread the word. And so I mean, again, we're a month in. We don't know if this is the right path. We're doing a lot of testing and learning, but that's one we think will work based off of what we've seen work with other brands.
Yeah, nice. And final one, just because a lot of our listeners will be Amazon sellers, do you have a particular Amazon strategy, or is it just throwing it up there and waiting for that branded search? What are the thoughts there?
So Amazon is such a beast of its own. We've actually decided to outsource that to work with a digital agency that is handling our agency business, our Amazon business. So Scott and I, we're the team, so it's just the two of us, and there's just a lot of hats that we have to wear. And Amazon's gotten so big and so complex that we prefer just to work with experts in that space. And so, yes, we do have a strategy, and we're running ads and whatnot on there, but we're not in the day-to-day weeds as far as managing that listing.
Yeah. No, awesome. Good stuff. Well, I mean, I could ask you questions about this all day because I think it's fascinating, but we're already up over 40 minutes, and I know you're going to have lots of PaddleSmash sets to sell today. So is there anything, though, to finish, though, that I haven't asked you, maybe that I should have, that you think is worth everyone hearing?
Just where people can find it. I don't know
we
said it. It's just paddlesmash.com. So easy to find us. Any of the US listeners, it's free shipping. I think that's the best thing to kind of get the word out. In the UK, we'll get to you eventually. Keep asking, we'll get there. So yeah, we're working on that. It is part of our long-term plans, but we're focusing on US now and kind of warm weather states and countries to start, but ultimately we will get there.
Yeah, no, I've got no doubt that it is going to blow up. You've got the examples of Spikeball, CrossNet. These well thought out, games do get massive. And I think the timing just seems so good with this. And so, I'm like, when's the next round? Let me invest, crying out loud. But I'm really excited to follow the journey. I assume you're on like social media and stuff like that with PaddleSmash. We can follow along there.
We are, yeah. It's almost all just if you look at PaddleSmash,
pretty much at PaddleSmash.
Yeah, awesome. So good. Well, we will do that. We'll leave all the links in the show notes in the description so everyone can check it out, buy a bunch of sets, spread around the PaddleSmash love. Tim, Scott, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate you taking time out today.
Thanks for having us. And Ben, if your listeners want a promo code, I'm going to give them a promo code right now. So Ben30 will get them $30 off. So we're gonna see.
There we go.
See if Ben's listeners convert. Yeah. So
right
Ben 30. Yeah, right here.
Guys, please buy this so I can become an influencer for a PaddleSmash brand. That I would really like that. So please buy this, guys.
Yeah, we'd like that too. Yeah, we'll figure out a way to get one to you, just so you can start spreading the word there. If anyone's listening in the US, Ben 30. No spaces. Nice. We'll get you $30 off.
Good. Come on. Sounds good. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure there'll be some people that take advantage of that. Amazing. Thanks, guys, for joining us on this episode today of the Brand Builder Show. Do check out all of the show notes, like I mentioned before, in the description, in the show notes on the podcast apps. And we'll see you in the next episode real soon.